I feel like this is the best 9-game stretch that I could ever remember for the Pirates to open the season.
Well, Pirates the most fun team in baseball right now. Last week we were saying, "Hey, just relax. It's 2-game 3-game sample." And all of a sudden, you turn around a week later and they're the most exciting team in baseball. The hoisting the cone has reached a whole new level.
Welcome back to episode 14 of Out of Town Yinzers. I'm Joe alongside Justin. We're talking Steelers, Pirates, Pens, and Pitt again this week. But the lead this week is the Pirates. And it's not just because of Connor Griffin. I think it's more because of the cone right now. Is that what you'd say? But it's a fun
Yeah,
time to be the Pirates. I feel like this is the best 9-game stretch that I could ever remember for the Pirates to open the season.
well, Pirates the most fun team in baseball right now. I
They're
mean, between
leading
the cone.
national segments. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. So it's amazing. Last week we were saying, "Hey, just relax. It's 2-game 3-game sample." And all of a sudden, you turn around a week later and they're the most exciting team in baseball. So the hoisting the cone has reached a whole new level. There's a lot of people I think that still don't even understand that. For those people that don't get it, there was a misprint on a Fanatic shirt in the offseason. A lot of Pirates people were trying to figure out what it was. Some people thought there was a food menu item at the at the Pirates game, I think, at one point. Uh, nope, just a misprint of Hoist the Colors, which is this is exactly we talked about this before. This is what's so fun about sports. Stuff like this takes on like its own, life of its own and becomes a whole thing. And all of a sudden you have PennDOT getting worried about traffic cones getting stolen all across the city. Just a fun story. I love that the players just embraced it, thought it was hilarious, and just ran with it. And they've been playing great since they embraced they brought it into the dugout. So perfect timing with the cone for sure.
I was sad to see Jared Triolo go on the DL, but it's good to see the cone man, Billy Cook, back in the dugout. He really holds that thing higher than anyone else.
Yeah.
So it's really just been a fun aspect. I think the biggest thing when you look at the Pirates team right now compared to the roster and the team composition the rest of the way is that they really do have a much fuller roster across the board. And it makes it so, Connor Griffin only has one hit in the first 4 games, but they're still winning. Ozuna can't hit anything. They're still winning. Those two guys will hit eventually. I would say Ozuna, probably is, more of a wild card between the two, but he historically has come around after some slow starts as well. So it's just a complete team. And when I think teammates like that know it's a complete team, it's much easier to come together as a group. The baseball season is long though. So I was thinking as a Pirates fan that the biggest thing was just to not get buried in April and stay alive. And I think they've already done that so far, but it's the dog days getting all the way through is going to be how they keep winning. And really the thing that we said before the season, that was the reason why they were going to be in the place that they were and why I was all excited and saying first place 89 wins was the starting rotation. And that has held up dramatically. I mean, to be the only team in Major League Baseball to not allow a home run yet from the starting pitching staff, to have Paul Skeens probably throw your worst start of the whole rotation so far, that's pretty amazing company. And really, as long as they stay healthy, knock on wood, that should continue. And you get some reinforcements with Jared Jones coming in early June, mid to late June as well. So really that rotation is going to be the horse, and they're holding up to the value of that as well.
Yeah, and you said this, there's really nothing to complain about with the exception of Ozuna. Obviously, the hitting with runners in scoring position, that needs to improve. That's usually the type of thing that we said that last week. It'll even out over time. But other than that, I don't know if you're complaining about something, you're just looking for something to complain about right now, the way they're playing, the way they're pitching. They're just a fun team. And now to let you dive into Griffin, just thoughts so far and what you've seen. Obviously, that you couldn't have much more of an exciting first at bat, pulling an outside pitch like that to deep center. Just thoughts in general on him so far.
Yeah, I mean, it's only 4 games, so small sample size. You could say it's only been 1 hit, so I think he's hitting under 100 right now through midway through the game on Monday. But at the same time, he had got on base the other 2 games. And Connor Griffin, someone with his speed, he just needs to get on base, and he's going to be a big key to that team. I think the stat was he's only been the 3rd teenager to get on base for the first 3 games, or maybe the 4th, and the other 3 or 4 on that list are all Hall of Famers. So even with the slow start of only one hit, hell of a start for Connor Griffin. The other side of that is that his infield defense is miles better than any other shortstop that you could probably put at that position outside of Alika Williams, and who wants to see him? So I think your Connor Griffin has a very long leash when you're someone who can play defense and have the speed that he does. It'll allow the bat to come around. And he doesn't have to be in the top 5 of the order right now with the way that the rest of the lineup is. So if he continues on his way as he should, it's really should only be up from here. And I think, as fans, if we give him that grace to allow him to have some slumps and to really settle in, that's only going to be a positive for him long term, to have a little turmoil and to be able to overcome that as well.
Yeah, that play he made up the middle was great, especially like most shortstops, like naturally they're just way better deep in the hole as opposed to making a play like that up the middle. So that's really nice to see him make a play like that, especially early, just to gain some confidence in the field. Making a play like that, that would be huge, especially we talked about defense enough, with the outfield. It would be nice. It already is nice. Like to your point, he's an upgrade already. All of a sudden, you put guys in the right position, like you said, with Chirola being out is, unfortunate, but their defense is already better in the infield. That'll show. That'll matter over 162 games for sure.
Yeah. And you mentioned the outfield defense. That probably is the biggest thing to complain about as a Pirates fan. It
Right.
it cost them game one of the year. Tonight, Brian Reynolds was flailing and fell down out in the outfield and then allowed a ground rule double that chased Bubba Chandler. So that outfield defense was something we had also circled before the season.
Mhm.
I didn't think Ryan O'Hearn would be the best defensive outfielder
Right.
out of the three of those guys, but he clearly has been. He's made a couple sliding catches. He looks really comfortable out there in right field. But, Brian Reynolds was a little tough to watch last year. That's continued. O'Neal Cruz obviously had a bad game one. I think we got to let him play out a little bit with the way he's hitting. But
Yeah.
at the same time, that is probably the downside. I think you got to accept some of that if they're still swinging the bats out there from those three
Yeah,
spots.
O'Hearn did misplay that ball Sunday. Came up a little what an 8-1 game, I think at the time, came up a little too fast on that ball. Again, the way he's hitting right now, to your point, Cruz the same way. You just kind of have to. It is what it is in the field. Again, we've beat that to death with this isn't fantasy baseball, things like that. But again, it's a give and take. And right now, the way they're pitching, you're gonna take that every day.
Yeah, I think the caveat of that though is the way that the pitching staff works. They're more of a strikeout fly ball type staff, which plays to most of your outs kind of going to the outfield, those pop ups, things of that nature.
Hmm.
But at the same time, man, I think we had said before the season, if the Pirates could get somewhere just a mid-tier offense, then they're going to really be cooking. They're a little bit above that right now. So they're probably like eighth, ninth best offense statistically right now in the majors. If they could even, regress a little bit and still be right around the mean there and somewhere around 4 runs a game, they're going to win a lot of them.
Yep. Agreed.
So the other team that's winning just as much as the Pirates is the Penguins. So it was a hell of a weekend for Pittsburgh, sweep of Baltimore, sweep of Florida for the Pens. The rest of the teams the Pens were going against all suck now, with the Blue Jackets fading off and the Islanders firing their coach, enough so that it looks like it's going to be Philadelphia versus the
Yep.
Penguins in round one. And that's kind of how it's gearing up. I think it's about a 52% chance going into tonight, going into Monday, that's the matchup. Probably not what you want to see as a Pens fan, but it will be exciting to watch.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, right around that. It's basically a coin flip. The Flyers versus the rest of the division. It's looking like, I mean, they're in the playoff. They're 99.9% chance to make the playoffs. They're in the playoffs. They don't play again until Thursday, which that's kind of flying on the radar. They're going to need that rest. I think this is really big for them to basically be able to close out, get get some of the older players a little bit of rest heading into the playoffs. That'll be big with the way the schedule was backloaded like this. Making the playoffs is a big deal. I think winning out the way they have here and basically clinching a spot is just as big. And as hard as we've been on the defense, with the exception of even the Lightning game, they didn't look good. I mean, 4 or 5 here since we were on the podcast last week, wondering if they're gonna sneak into the playoffs, and now they basically clinched. Girard has looked better. As hard as we were on him, he's setting some stuff up. He's making plays in general. I think sometimes you do have to give players a little bit of grace. Not that I have a ton of faith in the playoffs and, we'll see what happens, but I do think we have to point out, as hard as we've been on him, as hard as we've been on that pairing in general, he has put together, a few solid games, and that's really important. That their entire season in the first series, how far they go is probably going to hinge on some combination of that second pairing and the goaltending. I may be coming around on bringing Murashov up. I just think there's you made this point earlier. I think
Well, he
there's
is coming up.
ceiling. Well, yeah, but I mean, we'll see with Skinner being hurt and things like that. I think the path for them, the way the goaltending has looked, I mean, they're winning games. Like we said a week ago, they're scoring a touchdown to win games. You can't do that in the playoffs. And you're noticing they're scoring enough to beat bad teams, basically, and teams that are right there with them. And you run into teams like the Lightning that are just better all around. It doesn't work. So not that the goaltending's been horrible. It hasn't been good. But I don't know. I think Murashov might be your path to a goalie that can actually steal a game or two, and you're going to need that in the playoffs. I mean, you don't go deep in the playoffs without having a goalie that steals a game or two, or they're just not getting that from the goaltending. So I'm going back and forth on, is he ready? Do I want to put him behind this defense? And we probably know he's the best path to a deep run in the playoffs.
Crosby's 38, Malkin's 55 now or something like that. Like they're both like, this team is old, the best players. So,
Right.
whatever gives you the best chance to win, this is not somewhere where they're supposed to be. This is not a place where you want to hide something. So let me run through this. The Pens have scored 73 goals in the past 17 games, but man, they're allowing
That's
so many
crazy.
goals. So against the Panthers, 2, 4 goals, 6 goals. Then they gave up 1 against the Red Wings, blew them out. 3 against the Islanders, 6 again, 3, 6 again, 5, 4, 6 again. Like, that's a lot of goals you're giving up. And when you get to the playoffs, the teams in the East, outside of the Flyers and kind of those wild card teams, which the Pens won't see those wild card teams, as they move forward, those rest of the teams, they are much better on both sides of the puck. Particularly, I'm thinking about the Canes going forward. That's one of those. It's like, you're not going to have those games in the playoffs that are 6-4. Like, that doesn't happen nearly as much. You're going to have to win some games 2-1, 3-2, and that's the thing that could really trip up the Penguins. You gave Girard some pluses, and I think that just shows you how low the bar was that we're talking about.
Yep.
Girard had a couple of good games, but you just said solid games. It wasn't even good. Like, it's like you're just looking for solid from one of the guys that they have. I mean, Shea has been probably their best defensive guy that they have. He's getting more ice time, which means less ice time for, Letang, Carlson. So you got to find that right mix, but that is absolutely the weak spot. Even more so than the Pirates outfield defense, the Penguins defense themselves is the thing that can really cripple them. And, knock on wood, that's not the case, and you get a little bit of a long playoff run, but, it's hard to get too excited about like a cup run when you have giving up that many goals throughout March and early April.
Yeah, I have a few. The reason I'm always hesitant to play the Flyers in the playoffs. I have a lot of friends, like we talked about. If you listen, was it the first or second podcast? I have a lot of friends that are Flyers fans. We will be literally living with 3 Flyers fans this upcoming weekend. Happen to be Orioles fans, so that might be pretty fun. And it has been for me this weekend. But I'm a little personally hesitant to play the Flyers. Ironic, because I was talking to them last night, and you just kind of reminded me of this. I don't think the Penguins want to try to win like they did in, what was it, 2010, 2011, the year where they were playing the Flyers and every game was like 7-6. There was a 10 goal game by the Penguins when they actually won a game. That's not a recipe to win. That's what we could be looking at if they don't figure some things out defensively. So it's just not sustainable. You don't want to be, getting into track meets every single night. And unless, they get a little bit better goaltending, a little bit better defense, that probably is the recipe. And again, 2010, I think it was 2010 or 20, I think it was 2011 actually, that the Flyers went on their run. Ironically, maybe that may be the matchup, and you want to avoid that type of a series again for sure.
Yeah, like I said, the Pens are now in the playoffs, so it's all about the playoffs now. All of our podcasts leading up to now is whether or not the Pirates are going to make it. We even asked the question, a few months ago, who's going to be the next Pittsburgh team to win a playoff game? And then it became pretty evident it's the Penguins. So excited they followed through and went through that hellacious March, and they got to the softer April and kept on winning. So, when you got a guy like Crosby and Malkin that are fresh going to the playoffs, there still is hope, even with the defense the way that it is. That's why we're trying to find that silver lining of a Murashov to really cover up some of those warts if we can.
And it honestly, it played out like we thought we said. We commented on the schedule, how rough it was, no Crosby. We said tread water, and then you could take advantage of the schedule, and they have, and that's all we really asked. And now we're looking at the playoffs. So I just playoff hockey in general. It's just been a couple years, and you just wanted, they made so many mistakes. Hextall did with the depth on the team. And obviously they have their warts now, but man, they would have killed for the depth at forward that they have this year, last couple of years, basically since the cup run. They just haven't had depth like this. So there is a positive. There is a positive. You don't score, you're not top 5 in the NHL in goals for no reason. And the system is tightened up too. So it's not like they're just playing this crazy style like they did at times under Sullivan. So there's definitely some pluses. There's some pros and some cons for sure. But at the end of the day, there's no, I think I saw they had a less than 10% chance based if you went off of Vegas odds to make the playoffs. I'll have to confirm that. I think I saw that online this week, but
At the beginning of the year? Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
It was
So
like
anyone
6,
who's
7%
saying,
or something.
yeah, anyone who has anything to complain about right now, you're just looking for something to complain about at this point.
Yeah, before the season started, they were giving the Pens better chance to get Gavin McKenna than they were about making the playoffs. And
Right.
this is a league where half the teams in the league make the playoffs. So it's, while it feels really hard when you're battling these teams, it's still, the top 8 of like 15 that make the playoffs. So, it's definitely in their favor that way. I think the thing that's really cool with this team is that the changes that they made all kind of came through. We talked about Dubas, but I feel like Muse doesn't get enough credit
Yeah.
with kind of the thing that comes around with a coaching change. Again, we talked about the Islanders dumping their coach, Patrick Waugh, right now, like with 5 games left. I don't know what you're
It's a
expecting there.
wild
You can
move.
get a little spark. The Blue Jackets did it too. I guess they just want that
The
little spark
Penguins
to
have
win the
technically
last
done
few
it, and
games.
yeah, the Penguins have done it on some of their cup runs, so I get it. I think it's a
Not
little
this late
late.
though. This is
No, it's
really late in
a
the
little
season.
late. It's a lot late, to say the least. This is a little crazy, but hey, I guess, when you're in free fall like they have been, I guess you got to try something. We'll see if it works. They're, like you said, basically the Caps, Islanders, and Blue Jackets are all splitting the other half of the pie with the Flyers for that. There's other ways in, but essentially that third spot.
Yeah, the Blue Jackets are done too. You listen to them on the local radio here in Columbus, and they've sailed on that team 2 weeks ago. All it took was just a little trip up. And that's the difference between a franchise like the Blue Jackets and the Penguins, where, we're talking about kind of in March, like almost would be really disappointed if you didn't make the playoffs. I feel like the Blue Jackets fans were kind of the other way. They were just almost waiting for that other shoe to drop
Yeah.
of something to go wrong to not make the playoffs, as opposed to like being surprised and shocked if something were to go wrong and they didn't make the playoffs. But, such is life when you're in a team following Sidney Crosby around for 20 plus years. And, can we talk just 2 seconds about that point per game streak by him? Because, there aren't too many records in hockey that you can get now with the way the scoring is down from where it was in the Gretzky era. So for him to be all on his lonesome on a list like that is pretty special.
Yeah, especially like if you look at it, scoring is actually up now, not relative to Gretzky era, but now relative to when he started. That was when hockey was the game was tighter. It was called much tighter. So in a lot of ways, the beginning of his streak is just as impressive as the back. But yeah, at this age, like this is Crosby. His consistency, the way he trains, things like that. That's why, and I don't mean this to disparage Ovechkin at all, but there's a reason why Crosby's playing at the level that he does, and then you got Ovechkin taking 0 defensive zone faceoffs or being on the ice for 0 defensive zone faceoffs, basically the entire season. And that's not to disparage Ovechkin. It's just that's the longevity, I think, Crosby, because of some of the way his game, works out and the way he can play and the way he's been training. That's just the difference between him and a lot of stars is just his longevity, his consistency, things like that. So, that's what's crazy is if you would have told me he would have done he would have had the point streak hit 21 years this point in the season, I'd be like, well, that's all we're going to have to talk about. And we almost forgot to talk about it. That's how exciting they've been this year and how how much they've, in a lot of ways have overachieved relative to expectations.
Absolutely insane that Crosby's point streak can go drink an iron right now down at the corner bar. So, pretty insane. But he's no slowing down. I think that what Muse said too in a recent interview. It's the first year that Muse has coached Crosby, and I think he's thinking Crosby's got at least 3 or 4 more solid years in him the way that he's talking. So the other side of the coin for Pittsburgh sports that usually would lead our podcast is the Steelers. We pushed them down 2 weeks in a row for all the right reasons. But we are just a couple weeks away from draft season. Today is going to be about the defensive side. So I still think the biggest things they need, and if they drafted all 12 guys and they're all on offense, probably would be a happy guy on this side. But there's definitely some people to draft on the defensive side, and a couple of my guys that are in there too. So we'll run through the composite rankings by position. Justin will give some takes, some his guys. I'll talk about some of my guys, and then we'll kind of see once we get through the draft if we drafted any of the guys we really wanted, and then farther down the line than that, or our guys actually any good. So that'll be the fun part to track on. But let's start with the defensive line, because I think while we may need an edge since you're going to trade them all away. It really is about the interior defensive line that I think you're talking about.
Yeah, so defense, this is my take overall on the defensive tackles. This is a weaker position this year in general. Not that there are not players. It goes without saying. There's going to be players in pockets of the draft. It's always about, the value and things like that. I think the defensive interior is the perfect microcosm. We'll get into our players, and I think they're really good examples of this, but it's the perfect microcosm of the draft. I would not bet on this. There's a chance that not a single defensive tackle goes in the first round. I think there will be 2.
That's what I was going to say too. I don't think there's a true first round slam dunk talent on that list.
No, there's a lot of really, and we'll go through this, but there are the first tier. So Caden McDonald is, this when we took, so for all these rankings, what we did is we took 5 to 7 depending on the position. It's a little bit hard to find some rankings for certain guys. They only go so deep. So we took anywhere from 5 to 7 of the analysts that we like, basically took an average, threw it together. It's not necessarily our rankings, but this is the analysts that we like, to give you kind of a general idea. So Caden McDonald from Ohio State, Peter Woods from Clemson, Caleb Banks from Florida, Christian Miller from Georgia. That's a top 4. That's really the top 4 that we'll go into a couple of these guys, but you're going to see these names start to come off end of the first round into the second. I think they're a tier of their own. It's possible one guy sneaks into, I'll touch on him in a second. It's possible one guy sneaks into this top 4, but there's a pretty clear top 4. Number 5 would be Lee Hunter from Texas Tech. He's sort of a guy where I don't think he's in that top 4, but there's a massive drop off. If you look at rankings, almost after the 50 tackle goes off the board, there might be 10 guys that can go in any order. They all have definite warts. They could be anywhere from, it's probably end of day 2 to middle of day 3. In any order, I don't think there's any consensus on any of these guys right now. But that's kind of, the defensive tackle is a great example of where, if you hear people that are like, hey, I don't like this draft. And again, there's more to it than that, but it's a great example that the top end talent isn't necessarily there. There's some really good players here. And then this is a position where I just don't think the depth is necessarily there. Not that there won't be players. It's really you're going to have to hit on the right guy. But this is a good example of why people are like, I just don't know. This isn't the strongest draft. Now, we were going to talk about our my guys. These are there could be different reasons why there are my guys or flag plants or whatever you want to call it. I went with Christian Miller. He is, I might have a type. I'm figuring that out about myself. I'm, especially maybe it's a little bit this year's draft. Yeah. Some, maybe not blondes, brunettes. Maybe I just like safe, good football players. I don't like guys that get off the bus and look great, run great in shorts like maybe some of Joe's players. I like second, day 2 good football players. Christian Miller is a perfect example of that. I think Christian Miller indirectly might be getting knocked because of this draft. If there was a top 10, top 15 D tackle, I think he might be ranked higher by a lot of people. I think a lot of people are like, I don't want Christian Miller to be my number 1. I don't want my number 1 D tackle or my number 2 D tackle to be kind of a safe, boring guy that does everything except rush the passer. That's really the only thing he's lacking. Size, off the field, He's one of the best workers at Georgia, stops the run. He's going to be probably a second contract guy, maybe one of the safest second contract guys at the position. He just he won't get into day one most likely because he doesn't rush the passer. So the upside, maybe not as high as some of these guys. It's certainly not as high as the guy that you're going to talk about. But he's just a good football player. And I think at the end of the day, and when it comes to Steelers, we can certainly debate and we'll probably agree on the fact that we want them to go for upside. But this is the type of guy, if you're making draft picks like this, you're going to build a good football team.
Yeah, no, I can't disagree with that mindset. I feel like that has been the mindset over the last 3 years. It's why Khan has built a solid squad that's now deep. And I think your brother Tyler has said it multiple times, is that it's the high end talent that is the biggest thing that's missing from the Steelers to really make those impact plays. And the guy that I like from this group that has the highest ceiling to me is Caleb Banks. So really, if you're drafting from this group, you're also looking at Cameron Hayward as someone who's going to be exiting stage left probably after the next year or two at most, type of thing. Caleb Banks is someone that you could dream on to be that guy for the next decade in black and gold with the way he could play. Same thing that you kind of say, with Christian Miller, like his pass rush isn't as great as you would expect it to be, but damn, he does look sexy coming off that bus for a big guy. And that's one of the things that when it comes down to it, the size and traits are all there. And when it comes to the NFL defensive line prospects, that's what I would like to draft for, is kind of to have those traits. I feel like there's a more of a learned skill in the defensive line and the NFL than some other positions where you kind of have to come in a little bit more ready.
Yeah, metrics, measurables, things like that. A lot of teams, especially on the D line, it's your length and things like that. Caleb Banks has all of that. I would, if you want to sound smart when you're talking about draft to someone, say to them, I like this draft, but what this draft is missing is a Caleb Banks without the injury issues. So Caleb Banks is kind of like a Jordan Tyson, but at D tackle. He's got some foot issues that kept him out this year. He had another, and he went to the Senior Bowl, and then he's having another foot surgery. So Caleb Banks is a home run. You're swinging for the fences with Caleb Banks relative to the Steelers, because my guys might not necessarily be people we want. They might not even be a scheme fit necessarily with the Steelers. I've looked at least how I was looking at it was more just a player that I truly like. I think is going to outperform maybe where they go. You don't talk about a guy. Caleb Banks is probably going in the second round. The more it gets closer, he's falling a little bit because of the foot. And this is the thing we were talking about before. Like, you only know so much when it comes to these health issues. I think Caleb Banks is by far the highest ceiling. Caden McDonald is going to be a guy that's going to stop the run like no one else, but he's doing nothing for you on third downs. Caleb Banks can be an every down player. It's just a matter of we don't know the medicals, and that's really the thing that I think is the reason that he is seemingly falling to day two. But I do agree, the ceiling, he's a home run. I'm swinging for a single or a double with Christian Miller. You're definitely swinging for a home run with with Caleb Banks.
And I think you'll see that throughout the rest of my guys. So they're either going to be big old hits or big old misses. So it'll go one way or the other. The one position I think the Steelers will absolutely draft with one of their selections this year, and you can tell by who's in the room right now, is an off-ball linebacker. So off-ball linebacker is one that really the top two guys, went to a school that usually is so good the Steelers can't draft from. Ohio State, Arvell Reese, Sonny Styles are both going to be off the board. So don't really have to talk about them. You had CJ Allen as a tier on his own, and then a bunch of guys that really were all different types of guys. So Jake Gaulday, is it Golday? I don't even know. I don't think I've heard that one out loud.
Yeah. It's Gaulday.
Jacob Rodriguez, Anthony Hill, and Kyle Lewis is like so much different than an Anthony Hill. So it's definitely a group where it's like pick your own poison once you get past those top couple guys. What do you think of the off-ball linebackers?
So I just made the comment, one of the weaker positions, great, example of why this draft is what it is. This is I'd say top 2 or 3 position in the draft is linebacker. So especially day 2. The one thing I want is I want an off-ball linebacker in day 2. We're going to go do our my guy in a second here. You could talk me into 6 different guys really in day 2, all of whom could be starters. They're all different. Like you said, there's like 2 of each type of linebacker almost with these guys. There's some similarities between some of them in terms of like production in college versus the NFL, how they came up, things like that. But they are all a little bit different. So I would be happy with, you could really talk me into 6 of these guys that we're going to go through. So it's Galde, like you said, Rodriguez, Hill, Trotter, Lewis, Bechter from, uh, again, I've seen lists where it's really a flavor type thing. Like I've seen some of these lists where, Lewis is as high as 4 or 5. And, it's kind of like a preference with some of these guys, the position you need. There's a difference between obviously like Lewis, who a lot of people, we've touched on Lewis before. Just to touch on him because he's a Pitt guy. We've seen plenty of him. It would be, I hate that everyone's trying to put him into a box. Louis Riddick, for instance, like, which this is the other end of it, loves him. He keeps comparing him to Derek Brooks. I compared him to Levante David, who is a kind of a similar type undersized linebacker. What I would say the most underrated linebacker of this era. I don't know. I don't think he's a every down safety. I don't think he's an every down linebacker. He's just like a playmaker. That's why I said before, if he goes to a team like the Texans or someone that knows how to put guys in position to be successful, he's going to need to do that. So again, we like all of these guys, or I can't speak for you. I like all of these guys. I think the reason I don't want the Steelers to take a CJ Allen, who I have nothing against CJ Allen, I think he's in a tier of his own, and that he'll probably be a first round pick or has a higher likelihood than this next tier. I just want him to take a linebacker day 2 is what it comes down to. I think there's just a ton of value here in general. I'll jump right into my guy. My guy is Galde. Galde, I think the most interesting thing about him, and you'll notice too, two of my guys here are guys that went from smaller schools. He started at Central Arkansas, worked his way up to Cincinnati, didn't really know where to play him. He played tight end, he played defensive end. Oh, it's a power 4. Playing the
worked
power
his
4.
way all the way up to Cincinnati. I guess they're in the Big
Here we
12
go.
now, yeah.
Here we go. I like Jacob Galde. He is 6'4", 240, and he was playing the equivalent of the same position that Pitt played Kyle Lewis at, to put into perspective. Because 6'4", 240, and they have him out covering slots. Now, I'm not saying that you should do that with them in the NFL, but that shows
Who has
you
better
the type
hips,
of athlete.
though? Lewis or Galde between the two?
I mean, Lewis. I'd much rather have Lewis in coverage, but he's also doing it at 6 inches taller and 20, 25 pounds heavier. So unreal metrics. If it wasn't for recent styles, people would be talking about his combine in general. So he's a project. There's a couple of these. You're going to talk about one next, I would argue. But there's just massive upside with a player like that. I do think part of me wonders if there's, for the Steelers specifically, if there's a fit with him and Peyton Wilson. There's a lot of crossover between the two of them. They may want more of like a middle linebacker type in their inside linebackers. Their inside linebacker roles are unique. This is more, he leans more to like a Shazier type of a player, a long, taller player that can run, can cover, type of player that the Steelers want. It's just a matter of would they want to. And we're going to learn a lot about Patrick Graham based on what he does at the linebacker and the D tackle position. Does he go like nose, like a Dante Corleone late? And at the linebacker position, does he want to go more middle or more of an athletic inside linebacker? So it'll be interesting to see what he does for sure. And your guy is, again, similar. I think he's project, but with a ton of upside if you want to touch on him.
Yeah. And honestly, to real quick on, Patrick Graham, we have yet to hear him speak to the media, which is kind of nutty. It'd be great to hear some way of thinking what he thinks about the defense, other than Mike McCarthy saying he still likes the 3-4 because Bill Cowher used to run it. I think it's the most we've gotten about the defense. But
maybe
when I look
there's
at
a reason to that. Maybe they're just thinking, hey, we don't want to tip our cap at all on what we're thinking. Because I really don't know. I really am interested to see what they do in day 2 and maybe early day 3 at some of these defensive positions.
Yeah, it will be, interesting to see with a whole new staff. Are they drafting similar to the Steeler way, or is there actual some different changes? But one thing with the linebacker off ball particularly is that room right now, when you have Peyton Wilson, who is truly not a run stopper, he is already your coverage guy. So if you believe in Peyton Wilson, you kind of have your coverage guy that probably will wear that green dot eventually once Patrick Queen moves on. Patrick Queen also is probably a little bit more of a sideline to sideline cover guy than he is coming down and slamming the run too. So I think the thing that's really missing in that room when I look at this list is why, I don't go with Kyle Lewis as my guy, but more of an Anthony Hill, because I think Anthony Hill could get on the field as more of that run stuffer, kind of come down, and then he can learn his way to kind of come off the rest of it as well. So I think you could say the same thing with Rodriguez, with a Trotter. I think both of those guys are kind of more guys that are kind of play the run, but then also can kind of play the pass a little bit too. And I think that type of off-ball linebacker is one that'll get on the field sooner to make an impact for the Steelers. Again, kind of going against what I was saying earlier, maybe not the highest ceiling of the bunch, but really, when you look at this list, you could like I honestly, I probably before I started doing my research, I probably would have said Jacob Rodriguez was my guy because just watching him actually play college ball, his tape is by far the best out of anyone on this list outside of probably Sonny Styles. So, it's really a solid, solid group, like you said. Usually when you have a down group like the defensive linemen or, like some of those other groups, then another group kind of comes up and it looks like the off-ball linebacker is. What's interesting too is when you have a solid class, it's usually because you have a couple of guys who are just head and shoulders above the rest that are really at that top and it pushes everyone else down. And I think that's kind of what you're seeing here too.
No,
Though
I
I do
agree.
think we have Arvell Reese as an off-ball linebacker. He's probably more of an edge, but I think you
Yeah,
could
I
put him in
actually
an
it's
off-ball
funny, when
thing.
I was doing the composites, I actually forgot to even include him, and then everyone on their list had him. I'm like, he's gonna be more of an edge. I mean, he can do both, but I guess I'll just include him because that's how they're counting him. When we get into safety too, that's another position where it's like, how do you even quantify? There's like it's almost 3 positions nowadays at
Let's
the
slide it
safety
right into
position.
safety. Give the
Yep.
list down of safety, and we'll jump into our guys
Yeah,
there.
so similar to off-ball linebacker, Caleb Downs, one of the 4 Ohio State players that's probably gonna go in the top 10. Not even worth talking about the Steelers. He's probably gonna be top 10. If not, he's not getting past 11.
If
Um,
there's anyone
then
that
you're
slides in that top 10, I feel like it could be a Caleb Downs. But
Yep,
I
and
hear
just
what you're
solely
saying. Probably
because of
won't get all the way down to 21 unless the
no,
Steelers want
no.
to play up for him.
Yeah, no, that's just solely it's nothing about against him. If people are starting to nitpick a little bit on him, it's just we're just getting to the point where people are getting fatigued
Has he
with
run?
prospects.
Has Caleb
I don't
Downs
know if he
run a
has or not.
40?
Yeah, I'm not sure if he
Yeah.
has or not. Like the knock on, and I don't want to get into we there's no point in talking in depth on him, but the knock that people are starting to say is, well, he made all of his plays in the box, and it's like, all right, well, just because he made so many plays in the box, and he's not like he didn't make plays in center field. Nick Saban trusted him as a true freshman for a reason at Alabama. So he's by far, a safety you don't see very often. People are comping him to Ed Reed in terms of like intangibles and instincts. The second tier is interesting. This is a tier of safety that you don't see every year. I think we got your one of my guys at number 2, Dynaman from Oregon, Emmanuel McNeil Warren. He's a guy I talked about at Toledo. These are end of the first. Well, it could go as early as the Bengals, but basically top third of the first through the end of the first. I would assume both of these guys are probably going in the first. They could be players that the Steelers are talking about, so they're in their own tier. The next tier, there's 2 players, AJ Halsey and Keontae Scott, who I do like a lot. We'll talk about more of my type in the second round here in a second. And then there's a big tier that we had talked about before, Zakee Wheatley, Traden Stukes, who seems to be rising quickly out of Arizona. Kamari Ramsey, we talked about out of USC. Bud Clark at TCU, and Genesis Smith, also out of Arizona. There's a couple other players too. Safety, and then that's your like third round into early day 4 type where you'll start seeing a run. But there's again, similar to D tackle, there is a big tier. I do like the safety position though in general and a little bit deeper. It's similar. It's not head and shoulders above D tackle, but it's a little bit deeper, I would say, than D tackle with guys I might like more in third round.
Yeah. So this is the guy, like, I have my guys, but this is my guy. So I am planting the flag on Dylan Thieneman. I was watching tape of him all day today, getting excited about this podcast. But for him to play like he did at Purdue 2 years, then go over to Oregon, man, and his highlight tape is one of those things we talk about Caleb Downs being able to come in, play in the box. Thieneman's plays are happening out in center field, they're happening from the slot. He is an awesome cover guy. Day 1 starter, would probably be the best safety on the team, even above Jalen Ramsey right out the gate. So if the Steelers draft a defensive player in the first round, it has to be him. There's nobody else that
I
I
like
want
that take.
from a first rounder.
Yeah, I like
And
that
like
take. I think
like you said too, yeah, go ahead.
no, I was just say I think I can get on board with that. He was. I'm not like we said before. I've waffled a little bit on this, but I think if they're going to draft a safety, would be a year I would be okay with it because of the draft overall. And I think he's a player that I don't think he's going to be there at 21, but if he is, I have no problem whatsoever with them taking him.
And I think he will be because he is a safety. I feel like when the day comes, I feel like it's someone that slants, but he's someone that plays a little bit more than safety because he can kind of play some slot and things like that. And the corner position isn't as good. We haven't talked about that yet, but I feel like the depth of the top end of the corner position, isn't as good as it has been in some previous years too, which pushes safeties down the list. It's just one of those when you think of who is going to be a playmaker for the Steelers that'll be able to be a top 2, 3, 4 guy at their position in the whole league. This is someone that I could circle could be that guy. And to me, you kind of have a Caleb Downs tier, and then you have a Thieneman tier, and then you have a McNeil Warren tier. I think a lot of the analysts would kind of push them closer together. I think the odds of McNeil Warren hitting versus Thieneman are not as high. Thieneman's almost a slam dunk of being an NFL starter. McNeil Warren has a little bit of rough edges. He's dreaming on some of that, that tall, Cam Chancellor type mold out there, big safety. But, Thieneman's someone who he ran up 4, something like that.
Yeah.
So it's like, I'm just really excited. And, the Steelers are someone I think have done best when they just sit there at 21, let whoever falls fall to them. That's kind of better than that 21 rank, and he would absolutely fit the bill.
Yeah, I do not want them to move up this year. This is the year I don't think it makes sense. I think there's enough players that you like here that would make sense. I'd much rather them move down, which again is easier said than done. Yeah, I agree. I'd be very happy with him as a pick. I think again, that's what separates some of these first rounders from the second rounder is again, it's just your risk tolerance. Like we talked about risk tolerance with a Caleb Banks. They just have usually a second rounder either doesn't have the ceiling or doesn't have the floor of a first rounder. And I think both these guys, especially Thieneman, he has the ceiling and the floor. Is really what it comes down to. No, he's not he's not a generational player like a Caleb Banks. Those come around, or Caleb Downs. Those come around once every, 8 years, once every 10 years. But I'd be more than happy if they got him. And it could happen. It definitely could happen. So and we touched on this when we were talking about linebackers. Safety is unique now because there's almost like 3 different positions. There's guys that need to be playing out in more of like a center field or, they can't really play in the box. There's, your box safeties and then your slot corners. There's slot corners now that you would not want to play outside. It's hard to make lists because like in this list, we talked about Keontae Scott is one. You wouldn't want him playing corner outside. He could play, and there's different versions too. Like he could play safety. He could play slot corner. You got guys like Traden Stukes. It was probably a little bit more of like a pure slot corner. Then you got guys like a Kamari Ramsey who could do it if you want them to, but he's probably more of a safety. So it's morphing. This position is morphing. This is where you see the NFL kind of evolving. My guy is, as we talk, I do like both of the day 2 guys. We talked about Keontae Scott before. I wanted to highlight AJ Halsey from LSU, another guy similar to, I talked about Galladay kind of moving up. Halsey started at New Mexico, went from New Mexico 2 years at Houston, ended up in LSU and was a first team all ACC player or all SEC player last year. So he's a ball hawk, 3 interceptions. The interceptions weren't like, oh, he happened to just get hit, in the chest with the ball. There's a big difference between some of those types of stats and this type of stat. He was, I think, 8th in the SEC in tackles, 80 plus tackles. And it's not like LSU was some team where they just got up on teams and, they weren't what they normally are this year. So I think he earned those stats. He's going to need to go to the right team in general. He's not the type of safety. And this is why he's a day 2 guy, not a day 1 guy. Certainly fits the bill. He actually has very similar measurables, ironically, to Kyle Lewis, which is where you see some of the comparison, talk about him playing safety. But Halsey, 5'11", 215 to 220, somewhere in that range. So certainly has the size. Ran good, not incredible, but again, he's a second round player for a reason. Exactly what you would think when you get a safety in the second round. So he's a safety you want to sit back. He is not what we just talked about with playing in the slot. He is a safety that you want to sit back, let him play middle field or center field, maybe too high, that type of a safety. Uses instincts, and he will come up and hit. He is a heavy hitter as well. So just again, like I was talking about before, Christian Miller. This is why I said I had to have a type. He's just a good football player. He's not, why you get it. You know why he's not a first round player, but you're going to win games with players like this if you build a team around this. Completely agree on the upside talent in general, but you're going to keep hitting doubles with guys like this. So you don't want to have him coming up, matching up against the receiver, and his lateral movement isn't as good as he's a little bit, his hips aren't quite as like loose, and he can't play with receivers quite as well and man. But that's really the only knock. Again, you got one knock, you know what you're getting. Like with the Christian Miller, you're not getting an incredible dynamic upside guy, rushing the quarterback, but you're getting exactly what every team needs. So I think you just continue hitting singles and doubles with guys like this, and you'll be a good football team.
Yeah. And then, the Steelers have 4 picks on day 2 right now, 2 more in round 4. This is where they're going to load up on their defensive guys, I would think. And I think the mock drafts are saying the same things. I think you had listed, what was that? 10 different mock drafts, and there wasn't a
Yep.
single person who took a defensive player for the Steelers.
Yep.
Way too many offensive linemen for my liking, but we can get into mock drafts a little later if you want to move on, but that's the thing on the end of the day. We just talked for 20 minutes about defensive players, and probably won't even hear one called until Friday for the Steelers.
Yeah, agreed. And I think we both prefer that. Again, Thieneman, there's certain guys we like, but like we probably would prefer them to go offense. But again, the draft sets up to where they could get they could get multiple starters in day 2.
Yeah, and you should expect starters when you're picking in day 2 as well. So they got 4 picks. They should expect kind of 4 starters in the long term of that. So lastly, we're going to wrap up with Pitt football again. Last week we talked about the over-under for 7.5. We were kind of getting rosy. We were both kind of leaning towards the over, so had some good momentum being positive about Pitt. And then Justin picks a segment this week where he says Mason Heitschel is a bottom third quarterback in Power 4, ranked 46 out of 68 according to Billy Connolly. Or were you saying you did not agree with that, or where you at with Mason
That's okay.
Heitschel?
As usual, you just tell me how I think, Joe, and I'll just go along with it. No, I thought this was an interesting topic because I was surprised. I think to put his ranking into perspective, so it is 46 out of 68, 46th out of 68 Power 4 quarterbacks. I was a little surprised it was as low as it was in his ranking. His reasoning was you could justify ranking him in the 20s or the 60s here. I'm just splitting the difference, was his exact quote. I actually can understand the thought process there. I think what he's really saying is there's a really wide range of outcomes. He probably will either progress and let's keep in mind, he's a true sophomore. So I think that's worth noting as well. He could end up playing 46 this year, and that's perfectly okay in the grand scheme of things for a sophomore quarterback. But I understand his thought process. So really what he's saying is high ceiling, low floor. I think that's certainly fair. I do think it's pointing out, even going into that last stretch of the year, my exact concern, it certainly played out. I think Pitt's offensive line is going to get absolutely destroyed against Notre Dame and Miami. You'll see why, especially Miami, when they have 2 edge rushers that go in the first round. They're just unreal. It wasn't a strength anyway to begin with. I mean, he got pressured. I can't remember the exact percent. It was a crazy high percentage in those games. And at the end of the day, Miami could rush 4. Miami could rush 3. They're rushing 3 at times. Yeah. And they've got a Keontae Scott playing against your corner, and Pitt isn't big. So they just weren't getting separation. I don't know what you would really, and he had a decent first half against Miami. Notre Dame, I mean, the drops killed him early and often. And again, same deal. The defense in general just overmatched the offense. So even though he faded, or the offense in general faded, I don't know if there's a quarterback in football that you really could have put on that offense in those days. The way, some of the receivers were dropping passes, 10 drop passes in their 3 losses towards the end of the season. So again, it was more of a group effort to look like they did. I think it's worth noting there are literally players that were ranked higher than him on this list that did not have a 300-yard passing game. He averaged over 300 yards. So it's worth pointing some things out like that. I understand the thought process, and I actually don't even disagree with his comment on could be as high as 20, could be into the 60s. Maybe not that extreme in the 60s, but I get what he was going at. But again, 300 passing yards per game in his first 6 starts and an offense averaging 40 points. No, their competition wasn't incredible, but you could see what teams were trying to do. They were either like Florida State, for instance, they would rush 3, sit back in zone, we're not going to let him beat us with his legs. He'd run around, find time, he'd find a receiver. Because at the end of the day, I have concerns with their receivers this year. they were not getting separation at times last year. It's just you can only do so much as a quarterback when that's the case. So then teams would run man and they'd shut that down. Then he'd take off and run because he'd have open lanes and you'd have DBs running down the field with the receivers. So there's definitely some ways you could see that teams are trying to play him. And I'm really interested to see if Cade Bell and what they do this year to kind of counteract that now that you have an entire offseason. So I think it was worth calling out. It's an interesting stat. People had strong opinions online. I guess that my final take in general is he won't end up probably here. It's just a matter of which direction he goes. I think I'm optimistic about him in general. I'm a little bit more pessimistic about the players around him this year. Would be my take in general.
Yeah, I would guess that he probably isn't 46th on the list in terms of quarterbacks being paid this season with what he put out to 300 yards last year for him to come back to Pitt. So I think he has to outperform this ranking for the Pitt to have a successful season. He still is the most critical person on that offense.
For sure.
If they're going to do anything, it's got to be on his shoulders. Like you said, it's a lot of times of whether he was good or bad was kind of who he's playing against. But I think he still has a lot of those tools that you would expect, especially pretty loud tools for someone who is pretty lowly ranked overall as well from a recruit coming in. So it's one of those things that for Pitt, it's going to live or die by Mason. And what he showed you those first 6 games last year gives you more to be excited about than, the gauntlet that was the end of the schedule and kind of how they faded, I think.
And I'll give, this kind of just occurred to me. I don't know if this is maybe a hot take. We have some friends specifically, and I won't get into the exact takes, but we had, people were over the moon about Pickett after he beat Miami that first year. That wasn't really the way they won. That wasn't necessarily sustainable. And I was high on it. I got my Pickett jersey down here right now. I'm a big fan of Pickett. What Mason Heitschel did as his freshman was significantly more impressive. Now, I have my issues with the offensive coordinator that Pickett had to start versus, Cade Bell's offense. I think it's way more, sets a quarterback up way better to be successful, but there's a lot more, I think, to go off of in their freshman seasons.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. And the arrow should be pointing up on Mason Heitschel. And, again, if they're going to get to that 8-9 wins, it's going to be because he won them some of those games that they weren't supposed to.
Absolutely.
So let's wrap up this week with our nostalgia moment. This weekend, Pirates opening day was probably the most exciting home opener of all time. They were saying that crowd was like a playoff atmosphere. So I wanted to throw out what is our favorite Pirate game that we attended. Unfortunately, I was a big dummy and didn't go to the games in 2013 to 2015 playoffs, especially that 2013 game. It's probably one of my biggest regrets of life to not be there. But the game that I remember from a Pirates, and really the games in general, I grew up in the 2000s Pirates, so you were going to the game with about 20 other people, so that's kind of how it was. You could sit wherever you want. I got really good at dodging ushers in that aspect, but it was so fun in that era to just be able to get into the ballpark for $5 if you could flash a Giant Eagle Advantage card, where you're paying more for parking than you are to get in the gate. And my best memory of that, and maybe we can throw it up here while I'm talking, is Kip Wells hitting an absolute monster bomb. Kip Wells, if you don't remember, if his name doesn't ring a bell, he was a pitcher for the Pirates. He actually came from the White Sox in a trade. He was one of their best pitchers for that stretch, but could absolutely hit. And he hit this ball off of the batter's eye, that big green monster. And I think at the time was the second longest home run in PNC Park behind Mike Piazza. So obviously there's been some more shots since then, but man, it was fun to see just sparkles of good play during the 2000s for the Pirates, and that was the one that stuck with me.
Yeah, mine is so. This kind of plays right into what we were just talking about with the Pirates and the Orioles. I have a lot of family down there, so I've been to a couple Pirates games down there. Last one not so fun when the Pirates had 3 total hits in the game. We sat for 2 hours to wait to get in. That is not my answer for this question. But in 2012, I looked this up today. This was just the beginning of really the ascent with that Pirates team, which, like we talked about, that's when it's the most fun when you don't know what the sky's the limit. Things are just trending up. We went to a game in June and watched them play. This was when McCutchen had one of his crazy June streaks too, by the way. And I remember that. They won the game. It was fun. This isn't going to surprise anyone. If you're wearing Pirate stuff, you do get comments down in Baltimore. By the way, I do love Camden Yards. It is one of my my favorite stadiums. I always love the Orioles because of that. A lot of friends that are Orioles fans, and for sure. So it's always fun playing the Orioles. We went down to this game. It was with a friend. Pro tip: if you ever go to an Oriole game, it is not conducive to tailgating. We are going to have an out of town users tailgate at PNC. Would be very tough to do this. We will be doing that this summer. It would be very tough to do this at Camden. Camden is kind of the opposite of Citizens Bank in Philly. Philly is it's got they've gotten a lot better with like bars around there and everything, but it is a straight tailgating scene. Baltimore is the opposite. There's reasons, you talk to Orioles fans, there's a lot of reasons for that. But you are not allowed to tailgate in a lot of the lots. I had a friend that went down with me. We ended up decided I guess we just have to sit in our car and tailgate. So we literally sat in the front seat and the back seat playing a card game, I was handing them cards. So that's how we tailgated for the game. Really fun game though. In general, the Pirates are on their ascent, and wearing Pirate stuff down there was fun. So that was a memorable one. I went to a ton in the late '90s, especially, but it's fun. It's fun always going to an away game every once in a while.
Yeah. The fleeting memories of Pirates mixed in with the agony and some bright moments. That's
Yep.
that's the part of being the fan. But this is the season for the bright moments. So, anyways, if you're still listening now, you're definitely one of the real ones. If you haven't, though, please like and subscribe. If you're one of those few that are still listening to this point. Otherwise, we'll catch you next Wednesday.
See you later.